Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets lose maybe inarguably the worst game of the season, falling at home to the Memphis Grizzlies, effectively destroying their play-in hopes. We break down all the good times coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And Doug, where our journey begins is a 106-102 loss at home to the G League level Memphis Grizzlies. No insult intended, arguably destroying all of the fun play and energy that the Nets were building up over these last couple of games.
Well, not arguably destroying it, actually destroying it. It was
physically, mentally, emotionally destroying.
I'm willing to call this based on the context of where they are in the season, the amount of points that they were favored by going into the game, the 2 wins they were coming off of, the fact that it was home. I mean, and we'll go into all the stats that kind of broke this thing down. But I'll call this the worst loss of the season. It really was. And this is a team, which is really saying something for this Nets team, because they've had some horrible losses. They've lost to nearly every team that's going to be at the bottom of the lottery, where, by the way, they won't be because they're going to hand the pick over to Houston. But they'll be in the lottery, but it just won't be their pick. But this, based on all that stuff that comes along with it, and sort of like the motivations around like them having to win the game, right, as you get to this part of the season, if you want to keep your playing chances alive, it's the worst loss of the season, no doubt about it. They played with their food the whole game. They finally got some intensity late. It was way too late. All the key markers that you would look at in this game for like, were they out hustled or were they just out of it? I mean, they get blown away in these categories. We'll go through them. It really was, I mean, just brutal. Just a brutal loss. Like, just a shoulder slumping, sigh out. Why did we let ourselves get convinced by this team again? And I'm being serious.
No, I know. No, I'm laughing like, to not be.
How did we do it?
Apoplectic about it. I know.
It's our bad. It's just our bad. It's our bad. Like, we screwed up because after the 2 losses against the Hawks, you're like, 2 games out of the play-in, nice easy schedule. And then here we go. And then they lose to the Grizzlies, who are down 10 or 11 guys. And it's just kind of the story of the season.
And you mentioned, we'll talk about the stats. We'll talk about the schedule ahead here. This is the front end of a back-to-back as well. So that's always something to think about in your back pocket. But to your point, like, it's not about the late game sequences. It's not about if Luke Kennard had a walk as they were trying to inbound it there late near half court. Like, none of these things matter, because when you are, again, and the Brooklyn Nets, this is the other thing that I think we also allow ourselves to fall under the spell of a couple of wins. The Brooklyn Nets are a bad basketball team. How do we know that? They're 24-37. Like, that's how you know it. So even though, and I think we've done this over the course of the season, you look over and you go, this was at the time, a 20-41 Memphis team. They don't have any of their starters. They got all these injuries they're dealing with. So of course we should be able to beat them. This thing that we've done of believing in the talent on paper for the Brooklyn Nets, what the talent on paper has told you converting into the court is that they'll give you a really good game. They can give you a couple of really good games, but they can also give you just perplexing performances where it does not feel like they are capable of having a consistency level that's required to be a good winning basketball team. So that's why, usually we talk about critical moments and losses. It doesn't matter, because you should have been up by 10 or 15. You just did this with this Memphis team a handful of games ago, so you can do it. You should have been blowing them out, and that's the narrative inside the NBA. When you don't put teams away early, even when you have 20-point leads, there's always those little surges. There's always those comebacks you have to fight off. You never should have been in a position to need to come from behind, to need to hit down critical shots, to get big stops, to have them have a 5-second violation. All those things mean absolutely nothing, because you should have had this game dominated and well in hand when you got to the fourth quarter.
Yeah, there was like key markers of this game, like just on a high level. So they let the Grizzlies get up early by just letting them make all their 3-pointers. They were shooting like 47% like early in the game, 40, 50%, something like that. It was, fluctuated. They end up shooting 33%, but there's a but to that that I'll get to in 1 second. They allowed them to get really hot from beyond the arc early so that they're playing from behind most of the game. All those were great looks, by the way. Nearly all of them were great looks. They Nets lost shooters all game long, doubling and digging down at all the wrong times, leaving like the few guys in the team, like Luke Kennard, that you should never leave open, right? Over and over again early in the game on bad rotations. That's like, just strictly speaking, bad rotations. Then when the Grizzlies finally start missing shots, you're like, okay, great. Except that they would get all the offensive rebounds. They got out offensive rebound. Now this number comes up and looks closer near the end because the Nets piled on like 4 or 5 offensive rebounds really late. So it ends up 15-12, but it was really like 15-8 for a lot of this game. Like they were getting really badly out rebounded on the offensive end on these critical misses and where they couldn't get stopped. So they get like a decent sort of stop on the offensive end, and the Grizzlies would just get like a pretty easy offensive rebound, either get a kickback or either get a putback or just a reset. And so you look at those two numbers and you're like, okay, well, I can explain it. And then the Nets shot 17 for 30 from the foul line, and they made it up late too, because at one point they were shooting 47% from the foul line. 47% is an NBA team where they weren't like sending their bad shooters to the line.
2 of 6
right?
for Mikal Bridges before the late game sequence from the line.
Yeah, because all these numbers look a little better because of the late stuff.
Yep.
Like this, they ticked it right back up to being looking. So if you just watch the box score, you wouldn't tell the whole story. But they made so much of this really in like the last 90 seconds where the game was basically lost. And it really is like, it was just like, these numbers are so disturbing. I mean, these are really bad numbers for an NBA team.
And again, the context of who you're playing against matters here. So, for example, if we rewound this back in one of these games against Atlanta, now they don't have Trae Young, but they still have quality players there. All of the core pieces that they want to have, minus Trae Young, are active for them. So if you lose one of those games, if you have a bad night, you probably could look inside of it. If it's not about effort and energy and some of those things, you'd say, you lost some shooters, this, that, the other. I'm sorry, but the Grizzlies are one of the worst shooting teams in the league. They're dealing with the highest level of starters coming in, not available now inside of their scheme. They're putting out guys to try to they're trying to get minutes for all the young players and develop good habits. That's really what their end of the season is about. So you have a team that is really just looking for anything other than wins, honestly. But once you walk them down the path, of course they're going to take it. The Grizzlies probably prefer to lose as many games as possible while developing their young talent over the end of the season. So nothing about this game speaks to anything other than what has been the theme for this team, whether it was Jacques Vaughn as the head coach, whether it's Kevin Ollie, whether you had certain players or not, Ben Simmons, Cam Thomas, Royce O'Neal, in and out, Spencer Dinwiddie trades, all those things. The inconsistencies remain. And it really just does kind of, I think, accentuate what has been a problem for this team all season long. We will continue the conversation inside the stat lines. Who did not show up in this game? And what does it mean really for the remainder of this season? Is this a loss that amounts to the Brooklyn Nets blowing their play-in chances? We'll dive into that in just 1 second.
All right, this next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something big or small off of our chest. Certain things can just really start to get to you, those things that build up in your life over time. It's important to let it out, especially to someone who's unbiased on and about your life. Today, I want to say how we really feel about things. We want to get out in front of those things, not let them fester, not let them build up inside of us, not let them just kind of overtake our thought process. This is where therapy can help. This is where BetterHelp can jump in, because therapy can be different for everyone. Some of us have the big problems. Sometimes it's the small problems, where there's those things that you've been thinking about for a long time, or those things that have just cropped up. BetterHelp is worth it to give it a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible. It's totally suited to your schedule. You can meet with a licensed therapist. They're going to be able to be the person to talk to. Maybe you can just decide you're going to switch therapists. That's fine. BetterHelp's there to help facilitate that change as well. All you have to do to get started with therapy is visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. You're going to get 10% off of your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba. BetterHelp.com/lockedonnba.
All right, so as we continue the post-game podcast, the Brooklyn Nets falling at home 106-102 to the Memphis Grizzlies. We remind you, get over to WeGotNets.com, sign up for that free ebook, 5 stories in 5 days, all about different narratives throughout the Nets franchise history, and also options to reach out to us and tell us some questions and stories that you want to hear more about for the Brooklyn Nets and the New Jersey Nets, frankly. WeGotNets.com, free ebook. Sign up with your email today. One thing we won't sign up for is feeling like this team is going to be going towards that play-in tournament. Now, we just came off of 2 games where we talk about Cam Johnson steps up in a big way, and he actually gives it back. He supports Mikal Bridges' big game, the second one against Atlanta, really well for himself too. So you're liking what you're seeing from him. Then we come into this one. Now, Cam Johnson, you could maybe isolate here if you want. He shot really poorly from beyond the arc, 6 of 15 from the field in 37 minutes. Big minutes for him. Maybe you like that. Committing to the starters is something that Kevin Ollie seems to be doing more of late. But 39 minutes, 4 of 14, 2 of 8 from deep, 4 of 9 at the line, 14 points for Mikal Bridges. Like, I think Jekyll and Hyde might be the other way that you can frame this thing. One game, you get that version of these players that you think they're capable of. And then the very next one kind of doesn't matter about matchups. Inexplicably, they will give you this absolute down performance. And to go on top of that, we did see Mikal Bridges, maybe a wrist injury coming in here in the late games, then that doesn't change. The bad performance was already on tape before we got to this point, but that's going to carry forward to here too for him as well. It's just that was the most mind-boggling thing too. You thought you got over that hump. Hey, these guys, the Twins, they're coming together here for the late season run. They came together tonight to put together 2 inconsistent performances that didn't help this team.
Yeah, we'll see what happens with the wrist. Clearly, it was bothering. I mean, he had some really bad misses late in the game. He ended up making a 3, but he had like basically two air balls that on threes that made me really wonder. I was like, oh, maybe it's really bothering him. He did knock down a 3, made his free throws into the one that he missed. So maybe it's just I kind of hope it was the wrist to some degree because you're like, okay, that would explain it. I do not hope he's hurt, obviously. But yeah, like I think this is kind of the story that you need to get used to. And if anything, the game against Atlanta looks more like the exception than the rule, right? Because that's 38 points. But if you just track back, the other games today, 14, the game before that, 15, 4 against Orlando, 11 against Memphis, 15 against Minnesota, 21, and then 10 against Boston the game before that. I mean, this has been a really pretty rough stretch. The 38-point game against Atlanta, it's a good sign. But we've been saying for a long time that too much of the offensive duties are on his shoulders. He's just like pretty much not that guy. It's not really totally a knock against him. It's just sort of like he's miscast more than he's underperformed, I think. And it really gets accentuated in these Nets losses because you just need him to do so much more. And when it doesn't happen, like the tape and the stat lines just really jump off the page to you because you can point to this as, exhibit 1A, why the Nets are struggling. Like if he's not going to score, they really don't have they just don't have tons and tons of other options. And if those other options are going to have sort of like mid-level games and basically forget about it. So I hate to, again, put it on Bridges. I think that his usage is just way too high for like what he is. Although even tonight, like there wasn't even tons of usage, right? Like they just 39 minutes, he took 14 shots, or was that? Sorry, I just clicked off. Yeah, 14. He took 14 total shots in 39 minutes. So rough game all around. Maybe injury plays a little bit of a part of it, but it's just this is probably more of what we should just be signed up for. Unfortunately, with where he is, it's why the Nets desperately need other sort of like alpha scorers or like playmakers on the roster because it's just too easy to sort of shut their offense down on nights like this. And we've just seen this so many times this season.
You go ahead and you think about it. As we'll talk about some other box score stats here just from a high level and then what it means to look at the schedule going forward for this team. But you also think about wasting a really nice performance from Nicholas Claxton, 33 minutes, 8 of 10, 5 of 8 at the line, 5 of 8 at the line. So in a game where they only shot 17 of 30, he was one of the better producers at the line. 6 rebounds, 2 assists, has the 1 block, but 21 points. This is the other theme here. And then you can even look at Cam Johnson. We mentioned Cam Johnson, 18 points. I want to make sure we just drill down on that. 13 points for Schroeder, obviously, as well, came away with 9 assists. So there's other elements of this that you look at and go, and this goes back up to Mikal Bridges and to Cam Johnson to an extent. Well, you got a really good performance from Nicholas Claxton. Well, you got the support from Schroeder here, right? So there's been games where we think about, well, if everybody looks at a sink and no one's really giving you anything, then it's even harder to expect Bridges, to expect Johnson to perform at a high level. This is a game where you needed your top players, to whatever degree, wherever you want to rank them, they needed to perform their best and then let the supporting cast go ahead and fold in. Now, I also think that the box score can get a little bit fluffy in games like these too. The bench only had Lonnie Walker producing 5 of 10, 3 of 6 from deep as well. But, you have 4 out of your 5 starters in double digits. You have a double-digit score on the perimeter, knocking stuff, shots down coming off the bench. It's just, I don't know. All of this to say, it's just furthering my incredible frustration and being borderline flabbergasted. Like, I know that I need to accept that this is what this team is, but it's really hard, specifically looking at Memphis right now, to look at this game and see that they lost it. Like, this is harder than even other bad teams. Memphis is unique to other bad teams in the league right now based on who they're putting on the court.
Yeah, I'll call out. I guess I'll push back on the one thing around Claxton there, where I think the stat line looks okay, but I do wonder if, like, he's okay. It's probably not all his fault, because I think there were schematic problems with this.
Okay.
But like, it's a bad look for him to have 6 rebounds in this game. And
I will say, as you go through it, like
in a game where they're playing like Trey Jamison and Lamar Stevens and Santi Aldama at the 5, right? Like, and now some of that was schematic because, again, the Nets have way too many times ended up with the guards as low men in like switching schemes. And we see this time and time again where, like, they even said it on the broadcast at one point where Vince Carter was like, hey, like, Dennis Schroeder's just ending up like at the block like way too many times, right? So that is part of the reason. But at the same time, it's not the whole story. And they just got like out muscled at times by guys that just shouldn't out muscle them. So I know what you're saying about Claxton, and I don't like totally disagree with the game on that end, but I do think defensively, like, there was just a lot to be desired around the basket, in and around the basket, with the rebounding. Like, they got slaughtered on rebounding. Right?
Oh,
like,
yeah. I meant to drill down. You mentioned about the offensive or defensive numbers, but they lost this as a team total 50-33. Just
I like got guys on the other team that out rebounded Claxton, and I don't. This sounds like I'm like totally disagreeing with you. I'm not. I'm just like making sure that we point out this one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, guys that out rebounded Claxton: Jake LaRavia, John Conchar,
okay,
Trey Jamison.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, these guys had more rebound. Those guys plus Lamar Stevens at one point had out rebounded the entire Nets team. So I think that's the only part I wanted to push back with the Claxton thing. I just think there's a lack of physicality across the board, and he has to probably just be way more dominant in this game defensively and on the boards, and he just wasn't.
And you know what? And also, he took a tech in this one, right? Like, when we talk about that aggression that he plays with, and it's great. And then they get the shot and one, and you're like, and the ball. God.
That tech was so great because he volleyball spiked that ball.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, and I almost said it too, because it's something happened to him earlier in the game where I was thinking, I think sometimes he's just trying to get a tech. Oh, he dunked it and he had a putback, and he clearly just put his body into the closest guy to like let the guy know.
Yeah. He was
like,
almost like, that won't let you touch the basketball after I made the bucket. Like,
it
was the weirdest thing. Yeah, you're right, 100%.
He just does one of those every game, and I was thinking at the time, I was like, man, it's like he wants to get a tech, and then later, lo and behold, he just he spikes the ball in the thing. Anyway, that's my only thing is like the Nets just lack a lot of physicality. He needs to be a tone setter at times for this, and I just think that wasn't there tonight.
Yeah, and you can make the case that like he's emotionally or from those little actions and things trying to tone set, but it needs to come. There's a hierarchy. Be a dominant rebounder, right? Really dominate the glass here, and then be chippy, then irritate this other team.
That's a good point. Yes,
and you
right,
can
like have both things. Yes,
right. If you're doing
have both things,
then it's good.
Be super chippy when you have 10 rebounds and 4 blocks, and like it's all coming together. But like those things just weren't happening against a team where they probably should have. Again, I'm going to let them a little off the hook because I do think there's scheme switching stuff where the Nets have really kind of screwed this up a decent amount. But it just doesn't explain the whole thing.
And in the end as well, before we talk about this little bit of an outlook going forward here, in the end, I think Claxton, just to your point where you're right, he needs to also be held to a standard, right? We don't just go with Mikal Bridges. Well, his shooting performances need to be better. Cam Johnson needs to perform to expectations. If we want to talk about what it's going to look like this offseason for Nicholas Claxton and contracts, well, games like this will be ones that other teams and maybe the Nets would point to and say, remember that Memphis Grizzlies game? We needed you to step up in a big spot. And are you that caliber of player? Coming up next, is it over? Was this the nail in the play-in tournament coffin? We'll break that down for the Brooklyn Nets in just a moment.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers are getting $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Maybe you went into this game, you didn't believe in the Nets. You thought those last 2 games against the Hawks were all smoke and mirrors. You saw that +10 for the Memphis Grizzlies, a little $5 bet on that. You would have won it easily and gotten $150 in bonus bets from our friends at FanDuel. Quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, so much more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on. Shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA.
All right, so as we tie a pretty little bow on the Brooklyn Nets postgame podcast, 106-102, losing to the Memphis Grizzlies at home, by the way, on the front end of a back-to-back, by the way. We talk about the 76ers coming up next for them. Do we think when we look at it, because, oh, by the way, like we say the 76ers are in a tailspin and no Embiid. Well, they're 5-5 over their last 10 games. Yeah. So it's not like a total nothing burger. Guess what? Oh, you're going to play the Charlotte Hornets as well soon. Well, they're 5-5 over their last 10 games. You do get the 2-8 Detroit Pistons in their last 10 stretch and a 9-win team. So, don't get me wrong here. There are still winnable games. But when we talk about looking back potentially and circling this loss to Memphis, do you think that we could sit here over their next 3-4 games and maybe have them win 3 out of 4 of them and just be incapable? 76ers, I want to make sure I get their upcoming schedule correct here. 76ers, then they'll get the Pistons, then they'll get the Hornets. So these next 3 games, you can win 2 out of 3. Maybe you think you can win 3 out of 3, like, again, on paper. But then you'll get the Cavs, the Magic, and the Pacers, point stop. Does it matter if they win 2 out of the next 3 games at this point? Because the downfall is just around the corner, right? Like, you can't trust anything that they put on tape on one night for what's coming the next game.
Well, you definitely can't trust it. I think that they've made that very clear over the course of this year.
Clear.
No, yes, it's painfully clear at this point that you cannot trust them. So, none of these are automatic wins. I think one thing we've learned about this team and really about the NBA is just there's just too much talent, right? Like, there's just too much talent in the NBA. Even the bad teams have guys, and
like the Brooklyn Nets. They're a bad team with some good players. I mean, they fall into the ladder,
look at these teams, right? Like, you even look at, this Grizzlies team is not a good example because, like, this team just kind of outplayed the fights hard. Although they've been fighting hard all season. They played with but as someone that does this every single night, projecting the Grizzlies minutes has been a total, a labor of love because they have 2 guys on 2-way contracts all the time. You never know who's in or out. You never even know who's with the team. It's like, Jordan Goodwin, Jacob Gilliard, the Nets just signed him. He was on the team forever. You never knew if he was playing. Scottie Pippen Jr., they have all these guys. So, like, the Grizzlies are not a good example. But everyone else, they just have guys. Like, yeah, the Hornets are a bad team. They have Miles Bridges, they got Brandon Miller. Like, they have guys that are like trying. Trey Mann, who's been pretty good since coming over from OKC. Like, you just can't. There's no down nights for this team, and the Nets just aren't good enough to take any off, as we've again learned many times. They just don't have the requisite talent to be able to coast at all, like they did tonight. They coasted and they lost to a terrible team. So, would I be surprised if they won all the games? No, because we've seen versions of this team where they can put it together for 48 minutes for sure. They can do it. But can we at any point of this rest of the season, even if they're 10-point favorites again by another team, which by the way, they won't be, but which by some crazy thing that happens where they are 10-point favorites against another team, like, can you still trust it? Of course not. They're just not that team. They're just not good enough. They're not good enough. And so, no, we can't trust it from here on out. And I also don't think they're going to lose every game from here on out either. I just think we're just in for this sort of season-long roller coaster that we've had so far. They have to go out. They have to go hard for 48 minutes. There's no other way for them to play.
Yeah, and they're going to have, by the way, after the 76ers game coming up here tomorrow night, it's going to be on the road for 5 straight games, even including Detroit and Charlotte and Cleveland, Orlando, Philadelphia. Indiana Pacers.
Sorry to interrupt you. I'll say this. Do I think that we'll be happier or sadder at the end of these 5 games? My guess is this could be really get very grim, right? Like, there's a world where, like, a road trip like this, it could look real bad. Right. That's my biggest concern, actually, is that, like, we hit, like, the real depths of conveying a really great pick to the Rockets. I mean, these were things that would, don't matter in real life, but in basketball life, they count for a lot. And like, I could see a situation where that is very much on the table.
Yeah, I think, yeah, to your point, like, I'm not taking off the result against the 76ers, but if you lose either one of the games against Detroit or Charlotte, that one's going to be just above the loss to the Memphis Grizzlies tonight, right? And then Cleveland, Orlando, Indiana, like, you can understand why you could lose those games. So after losing a game to Memphis, if you, including the 76ers, if you win one game over the next 6, like, we're right back into that 7-20 over 27 games. And it hits even a little bit harder because this is post deadline and this is post Jacques Vaughn. And this is supposed to be, again, we keep saying what the organization wants to tell us is going to be the story going forward. Well, the story you're telling me is that you hate your fans and you want them to suffer miserably. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're instilling something incredibly difficult to stomach on a game over game basis. And there's still too much season left. If this Memphis loss came and you had 6 games remaining in the season and it was the exact next 6 games you go, well, you know what? With 6 games left to go, the Nets finally succumb. We just need to get to the offseason. There's 20 plus games left. We're going to be back here. I will bet all of Doug's money and most of his children, possibly his wife, that we're going to have a post-game podcast where we talk about a loss to the Wizards or to the Pistons at the end of the year, or, to one of these teams. We're going to come back in and say, like, well, how did you manage to lose that game? Because guess what? They'll also give you one where they beat some team we don't expect them to. And they'll toss that little line out there for you just to get a nibble and see if you're willing to bite.
Right. Again, like, after losses, it's hard to ever imagine them winning again, but they will win again. It's not that. It's just that it's mostly that it's disappointing because this felt like a time to really make some hay into getting into like this playing game, which for Nets fans is important at this point. I know people are going to say, oh, why? It's just a playing game. Okay, this is where we are in the season. Like, it's just time to get on board with this. Like, there's no other. These are the best outcomes. You want more basketball. You want more basketball. Is there like any incentive to win the games? No. So this was supposed to be a stretch of the season where we were going to kind of see them maybe claw themselves back into like tied with Atlanta or something like that. And just and getting an absolute total gimme at home as double-digit favorites and losing is like legit the worst scenario. There's a reason I said at the beginning it was the worst loss. Again, they've lost some terrible games this year. I'm fully aware of this. They've, the Charlotte game was a horrible loss. The Portland one, horrible loss. Like, they're getting dumpstered by Boston by 50, right? Like, they've got a lot of games on the ledger. I was just scrolling back to see. Oh, yeah, that's right. They lost twice to Portland in 4 days. Like, they've got some stuff on here that looks really bad. The reason I put this one as worse than those is because as we get later in the season and the leverage gets higher around like the wins, and considering the nature of this team and how much they were favored by, and it's at home, which factors into the favored part. But like, when you factor all those things in, it is the worst because the game means a little more now because you know where you are in the standings. That's where I think it really ranks higher up there because of the context around it.
Last note for me, in the very short term, over the next 3 games, Atlanta, who they are chasing, they will play at New York. They will be at home against Cleveland, and then they'll be on the road, wouldn't you know it, against those Memphis Grizzlies. So these next 3 games were the Nets to win 2 out of 3 and the Atlanta Hawks to lose 2 out of 3, right? We'll still be, from a play-in discussion, from a chance to accomplish that thing, you better believe it, right? Like, we're going to have a chance to have that discussion, but ultimately, we know what we're dealing with. But I feel like taking a second here. We did a very good job navigating this post game and the difficulty of the worst loss of the season for the Brooklyn Nets point stop. And I can feel myself like it's like the cycle is starting to come here where I'm going to have a hard time sorting out how I feel after they win a game, knowing that they just lost a game and they're probably going to lose another game. It's in really lukewarm waters on my excitement when they're going to win more of these games at the end of the season.
Yeah, they're like in this weird negative feedback loop here where it's like it just, you can't really break the cycle.
Yes.
Right? Like, you can't like, it's like this, or it's like a negative flywheel effect, or like whatever the right term here would be, where it's like they just can't seem to totally get out of it. Even if it looks like you're sort of cycling toward a better thing, you just you end up looping back around to this. But the reason they're looping back around to it, though, is because of like what this team is, which is a very mid-level and below team. Yeah. That probably just fooled us early a little bit with how well they played early in the season, if anything else.
Very much true. That 13-10 to start the year while waiting for Johnson to get fully healthy and no Ben Simmons, that as we're coming to terms with is far more of the mirage than what we've gotten over the rest of the season.
Yeah, it was like noisy and not signal. So, okay, we're going to get out of here. Usually we do post-game live with breaking it down on YouTube, but with the back-to-back here, and we got a special guest coming on the podcast tomorrow. We're really excited about this one, which I'll wait to say the name of it just because to confirm that after we do it. So I just want to make sure it gets in the books. We have a really cool guest coming on the podcast for later in the week. So we got a lot of podcasts in here over the next 24 hours. So for tonight, we are going to break out of here and not do an additional YouTube live, but we'll stay in after tomorrow's game for sure. Much appreciative, obviously, everyone that jumped in over on YouTube. In the meantime, go grab that We Got Nets free ebook, wegotnets.com.
Our strength grows out of our weaknesses. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Oh, my goodness. One of the all-time great poets. Get outside, everybody. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.